跟分析型的人，我们在沟通上一定要注意什么呢？如果你有分析型的同事、老板或者另外一半，我相信这个单元会对你非常有帮助。Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast。I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. Today's episode is the next step in our discussion on what not to do and more importantly, what to do when talking to each type of style. Today, we're going to dive into, shall we say, the more silent type, the analytical. For those of you who are looking for more of an overview on analytical, go back and check out episode 227. As a refresher from our two dimensions, an analytical is both low on assertiveness, meaning they are more ask-oriented and they exert influence by asking questions, and they are low on responsiveness, meaning they are more controlling of their emotions and less likely to show what they're thinking.
That's right. 我们今天就要来聊一下分析型的人，还有如何跟他沟通，尤其是在一些比较 difficult situations 或者是比较困难的一些 conversation 的时候，你一定要注意什么？
Analyticals are a communication style that thrives on information. The more information they have, the more comfortable they feel. And when it comes to leadership or decision making, analyticals often make the best decisions of any communication style. Now, the caveat to that is they make the best decisions when they comfortably feel they have enough information. But the difficult part of this is they never feel they have enough information.
有几个非常重要的 key traits， 也就是They want the facts, and they just want the facts. 还有呢，分析型的人通常他看起来是比较谨慎小心，而且他不喜欢是那种看起来好像他是在主导的这个人。And they're often slower to make a decision.
Analyticals are a communication style that they like to weigh all the information. They like to gather everything and critically think about each piece, which means that they don't particularly like when others exert pressure on them to make decisions quickly, because that type of pressure makes them feel and actually highlights, oh, I don't have enough information about this. I don't have enough time to get another information. This will create a pressure spiral. So decision making is something that you have to approach very carefully when it comes to an analytical.
那当然他们可能看起来也就是 emotion 不是那么的外放嘛，他可能看起来稍微没有那么的 excited, appear may be a little bit unenthusiastic about certain project, and then they're actually very good, very disciplined when it comes to time.
So when working with an analytical, two things that you need to keep in mind. One is that just because they're not showing enthusiasm doesn't mean they're not excited. Or just because they're asking you a lot of questions about their idea doesn't mean they don't believe in it. Actually, the more questions they ask, it's usually they're more intrigued and they want to learn more so that they can decide how to take action on it. The second thing that Sherry just covered when it comes to time is analyticals do plan out their time quite a bit, meaning they care about schedule, they care about milestones. And this also brings back into that decision-making piece from the standpoint of if they feel pressured or they feel rushed, part of it is because they don't feel they have enough time or they cannot schedule out enough time in order to make these certain decisions. So time is a critical component when it comes to communicating with analyticals.
So let's jump into the part where how do we prepare mentally when we talk to analytical, especially if you have a completely different styles. For example, the expressive. 那当然了 as an expressive, 通常我们在跟 analytical 去协调一些部分的时候啊，因为我们都是比较稍微有点急性子的人 When we want to make a decision, we make a decision. 那基本上我们不会去思考太多 We follow that gut feeling, right? We talked about that before. It's all about that gut feeling, that intuition, and not so much about the detail. 但是因为 analytical 他们是完全相反，他们需要所有的 information, 所有的 detailed information, 然后他们才能够去 commit 在一个 decision. 所以这个时候呢，如果 let's say 这个主管是 expressive, 他想要 make a decision, 但是他的员工呢 analytical 看起来好像慢慢的，好像并没有非常的积极，这个时候的主管呢，或者是同事 an expressive 就一定要非常的 patient. You have to have patience when you're dealing with, or when you're working with analytical.
In my career, I've worked with a lot of expressives. Many of my business partners have been expressives. And expressives, when they're excited about something, passionate something, they feel like they're just running. And very often they describe running into an analytical as like hitting a brick wall, which means all of that momentum, all of that excitement, when they're not mentally prepared to talk to a different style, it can just be like slamming up against something. Because an analytical thrives on information. And so when an expressive, or even in my case, a driver feels like, okay, it's time to go. I got the information. Let's make a decision. Let's make a plan. Analyticals will be the first person who's just like, oh, I don't fully understand. Could you explain more? Or why is it you're doing it that way? Have you explored these other options? And it can feel like a very strong opposition force. So back to the idea of how do you mentally prepare? Whatever passion or whatever excitement that you have, you don't have to put it away. But you have to understand that in order to bring that excitement or bring that motivation to another style, especially like an analytical, you have to be ready to transfer it. They're not just going to immediately absorb all of your excitement. Let's say the way an amiable will or another expressive will absorb that excitement and get excited with you. An analytical needs to have a different pathway for you to transfer that information. So as Sherry said, let's say you're going to go talk to your boss. Your boss is more of an analytical. You can bring your passion and excitement in there, but be prepared to answer a lot more questions or be a lot more concrete and why you're so motivated for this.
那在同时呢，如果主管是比较 expressive 的人的话，你千万不要去催这个 analytical 做任何的事情 that will actually give them a lot of pressure. And as an expressive, honestly, it's hard not to like nag people because it's like, come on, like send the email. Can you just send the email? Like 我有的时候要自己要很小心，就是 okay, I have to like take a deep breath. And then instead of asking them, how come you haven't done this thing yet? Just ask them, is there anything else that you need? Or is there any other questions that you have that I could help you with?
Another thing to keep in mind when it comes to working with an analytical and this need for excitement or passion or time pressure is that you need to give analyticals time to process things, which means oftentimes when a driver has made a decision or an expressive is excited about something, they may burst into the analytical's office and be like, we've got to talk about this. We've got to do something. I need a decision about this. And even if the analytical really likes the idea, maybe they are also very excited about it, that is not a good feeling for them. Whereas scheduling a time with an analytical, actually talking to them and saying, hey, there's something that's really important or I'm really excited about it. Can we talk about it and then set a schedule? Because then they can prepare themselves for having that conversation. Another thing that you can do is write it down. Right? Especially in the case of expressives, they don't like to take the time to sit down and then plan it all out or write it all down. But even in a message or in an email or a simple bullet point list of what you want to do or what you want to talk about, and then giving it to them to process, you will find that the conversation doesn't feel like that wall. It doesn't feel like, oh, I'm bringing all my passion and now I'm getting questioned to death about this. If I write it down, I let them process it. Then when I go into the meeting, I can have the exciting part of the conversation because they feel they have a baseline.
The best way I would describe communicating with analytical would be trust the process. It's all about the process. It's not about the results. It's about the process. And it's all about really communicating that information. Is there anything else they need, anything they feel missing, or letting them absorb the information, letting them take the lead. 所以我觉得在这个过程当中也很重要的，尤其是 for example, 你可能在提供他一个 presentation, you pitch analytical an idea, and you ask them the question, do you have any questions? A lot of times you may actually get silence because they're still processing that information. So I think a best way to actually just be like, all right, maybe in about a couple days, we'll come back and we'll rehash this and then we'll talk about more questions that you may have. You know, give them that time to process and then you can get them to talk about how they feel.
A great example of this is yesterday, Sherry and I were at a meeting, and the person actually running the meeting was an expressive. But within the marketing team, it's actually like half analytical, half expressive.
Yeah.
And so every time we came to a decision point or a brainstorming discussion point, the expressive would be like, does anyone else have anything to say? Anyone else have any questions? And then wait about 2 seconds and be like, oh, I'll take that as a no, and then move on. And that works really well for drivers or expressives. But in the case of the analyticals and the amiable, you actually found that later in the conversation, an analytical would be like, oh, I have another thought about the thing we were talking about before. And for some people, that may feel like backtracking the conversation. But the reality was the analytical just needed time to process that information before the question came out. So they kind of jumped back to be like, oh, on our last point, I have a thought about that. A few more quick best practices for talking to an analytical. One is that if you want to get the most out of the conversation, you should actually prepare questions for them as well. Meaning if you go in there and their main job is to ask you a lot of questions and get a lot of information. That's their default mode. But pre-preparing your own questions for them actually makes it more of a communication and make it that way. Like ask them a question, let them ask you a question. Don't go in there interrogation style and don't let them interrogate you. If you really want to have good communication, you should actually prep your questions, or you can go back and listen to a lot of our episodes on interviewing, actually knowing how to pick up information and ask good interview questions. That's also a skill that may help you in order to have better communication. Because otherwise, if you just ask, let's say, yes or no questions to an analytical, you will get a yes or no answer. If you want more details, analyticals have a tendency to have all the details in their head, but they sort them out a very specific way. If you don't know what to ask, you may not get the answer that you want. So really practicing your question asking skills or prepping questions that you want to go into a meeting and have a discussion with them is very important.
Another thing that's really important is that when you're working with analytical, you really do have to give them space, right? I think there's some really fun situation that kind of happened in the office where expressive 因为太急了 right? They want to get the answer. 他们常常可能会不小心瞄一下那个 analytical 他的电脑里面他们在做什么因为他们很急然后又得不到他们想要的答案但是这样的事情 of course, I think it would annoy anyone. It would especially annoy analytical 因为你根本就是不尊重他的这个 space. So that's something that you absolutely cannot do. Another thing is that be very careful with your tone of voice when you're asking questions, especially when you're like really in a hurry to make a decision, right? If you're asking in a way that you're like, come on, like, let's make a decision. You don't sound like you have a patient, then analytical will not respond really well to that.
And back to this time theme that keeps popping up. If you want the best results from analytical, give them a deadline. Which means if you want it on that day, you probably should not ask on that day. It's not going to end well. But of course, you don't have the ability to give someone infinite time. So if you need to give an analytical more time to process, you have to be very concrete about a deadline. Be like, I don't need this decision from you today, but I do need it by this date. That actually allows an analytical to prepare themselves for how much time they need or how much time they have to make that decision. Of course, you cannot just give them forever to finish something or to answer your question, but you can also not leave it open-ended, be like, oh, just tell me sometime next week. That doesn't mean as much to an analytical. To a driver and expressive, you're like, tell me sometime next week, and they have the answer, they'll just come tell you. But for an analytical, give them a concrete date. I need it by this date. And then they can prepare themselves and get it done by when you need. Well, we hope that you enjoyed this look at how do you prepare yourself mentally to talk to an analytical, and what are the best practices for communicating with an analytical. Also, join us on EP Insights in the coming weeks, where we'll explore how each different style can use their own superpowers to become a better team leader. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production. Produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.